Good morning, and thank you for joining this week's Social Housing Roundtable, where I've got Emma Morris joining me from Bromsgrove District Housing Trust. About a year or so ago, they introduced a menstruation and menopause policy. And today she's joining me to talk about what they've learned, what's gone well, what maybe hasn't gone so well, the pushback they've had, but also why it was so important to bring this in now and what they've learned in terms of moving forward. It's going to be a really interesting event, so thank you for joining us on this recording, and I look forward to your feedback afterwards. I say good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's roundtable on the Menstruation and Menopause Policy that BDHT have implemented and the learnings around that, really. To those who I've not met, new faces, nice to see you with us today. My name is Matthew Baird. I've been running a social housing recruitment agency since February last year, but I've been doing it for about 10 years. Met with Emma recently and she kindly called me an ethical recruiter, and I'm not going to lie, I have pinned that to a mast and it's written on my wall, so I'm delighted with that as a terminology. And the reason that these roundtables came about was to try and make change in the sector. And Emma and I got talking, she was talking about this policy, so we wanted to put something together today. If anyone wants to join in at any point, please either use the reaction to kind of raise your hand symbol on the bottom of your screen, or put something in the chat, or physically raise your hand and I'll bring you in. But on that note, I'm going to pass over to Emma to introduce herself and how this came out today. So Emma, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Emma Morris. I'm head of people at BDHT. And like Matt says, this is the first time I've ever done a roundtable. So I will be nervous. I will trip over my words. I will try not to swear, but I am really looking forward to this. So thank you all for listening and being patient with me as I go through. So in terms of why this came about, I think it'd be fair to say in 2018, you will have heard about the gender pay gap. And that was a piece of work we started to look at. We're an organisation that's actually smaller than the legal requirement to report on gender pay gap, but we wanted to do it anyway. And I think it's from there we started to look at not just the gender pay gap, but actually what impacts women's careers in general. Obviously, we've had COVID within that time, but certainly we then began to look at a suite of mental health policies. And I think you can't look at mental health and gender pay gap and then not look at some direct policies that influence women in the workplace. So when we looked at mental health, we wanted to establish a policy that was for menopause and menstruation in its own right. And I think the theme for me that goes across any of these policies is not rocket science. It's about opening the conversation. It's about saying the words that we're taught almost not to talk about. It's about having a policy, and I'll be honest, it talks about bleeding. It talks about the symptoms of periods very openly. And I think what we're trying to do is it's about respect too. So not everybody wants to be open and then share these experiences. For some, this will still feel very private, and we will respect that. This isn't asking every woman on the planet to suddenly start saying, I'm going through this and I want everybody to know about it. But for the people who want to and can't, that's why it's so important, because it's giving that gateway to conversations. It's also absolutely about educating the managers within BDHT to have those conversations, because again, you're breaking taboos. There will be people in this organisation who won't talk to their partners about menstruation. It will just be hopefully 5 days of the month that we don't talk about. So when you're then presented with a member of staff who is coming to you and saying, I don't feel great, it is due to my period, I could be perimenopausal, are our management team almost equipped to deal with those conversations? So the policy for me was a starter for 10 in terms of the work we need to continue to do. And I think it's worth saying as well, the policy isn't finished in its entirety. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but I think what's really important is most things, a policy is going to tell you the whys. I think sometimes what we miss is the hows, and that's very important with this policy. How are people going to respond when you talk about it? What support is available to you? If you share something with your manager that you find quite distressing, personal, embarrassing in some situations, how are you going to be guaranteed that the response you receive isn't actually just going to cause you more distress? So what sits alongside the policy is a manager's guide that's very explicit about the language that they should be using, finding the right environment for people to share their stories with, making people feel heard, asking them what they feel they need. Because without that, it's a little bit gung-ho. You know, we know as managers, we vary in our styles so much, but when it comes to things like this, we do need to give that guidance there, and being able to, again, go back and say some of the words that you won't hear. And even today, being recorded and saying the word vagina will feel out there, but we have to talk about that because it plays a big part in menstruating and perimenopausal and all the rest of it. So it's being comfortable to say the words that we want to say if it helps us speak our message clearer. And like I say, that's not everybody's truth. That won't be everybody's journey. But it's important that those few people in the organisation who are suffering feel that they can talk to somebody. I think what's also important with this is recognising that it's not just about perimenopause and menopause, it's about the monthly cycle. It's the regularity of pain, uncomfortableness, of trying to work when you feel at your lowest ebb, when you're dealing with emotions that just for that period of time may feel overwhelming. So again, it's about making sure that people can raise their hand, go and speak to their manager and say, I struggle with this. And again, one of the things we've got with this policy as well, switching back to menopause, is being able to have a tick list to spot the signs, because not everybody knows what perimenopause, menopausal symptoms can look like. There's a wealth of information out there, but not everybody wants to have a look. Everybody might be a bit scared, but if you can log on to BDHT SharePoint, and on there will be a tick list of symptoms. So even if you're at that point where you think, could it be that I'm just an overworked mom and that's why I've got headaches and I'm fatigued, or actually is there a hormonal imbalance that could be addressed? So just giving people some of those practical tips, I think, is really helpful.
I know that, Emma, when you and I sat down, actually, one of the things I really liked about the policy was that it was very inclusive of your male staff force too.
Yes.
And that was just as important, because as someone who evidently is on the male side of this room today, you know, it is very much that there's been a stigma around it, and there's always been that, you know, even growing up through school, you don't talk about that kind of thing. And actually, you mentioned yourself that some of the support that you've given to some of the guys who've come along to like the introduction talks and learn stuff like that.
That's why I joined it today. Do you know that? Because sorry, I'm dying to say this, because I actually come from a culture, I'm Pakistani Muslim, and I come from a culture where like so many things are taboo and you're not to talk about them. But I do the opposite. So that's why I'm here, because I thought, you know what, there's no way I'm missing this one. I know sorry, Matt, I missed a boring voice one on Tuesday. There was no way I was missing this one.
I'll be honest, it wasn't boring, but I appreciate it might have been for yourself. But I appreciate it.
I'm only joking. I'm sure it weren't boring, but you know.
Yeah, Emma, you know, in terms of that voice has been so important in putting this together for you, wasn't it?
Absolutely. We have had a couple of sessions where we've brought people, experts in. So there were a couple of years ago. And again, with anything, I'd recommend this isn't a one size fits all, and it's not a one hit fits all. It's a continual learning process. And we had a member of our CRT team, and he came to us and he said, it was just so insightful to hear some of that. And maybe I'm still not yet confident to go home and talk about it, but I'm more aware of the environment when I'm at home. So if we were ever to run any of these sessions, we will never say it's gender specific. It's not. It's relevant to everybody in some capacity. And I think even if you're a father, for example, and you've got a daughter who's menstruating, again, you don't tend to get involved in those conversations. You don't know what's going on, and family life is very different nowadays. You know, you might be the sole carer of somebody who is having a period, and you have to manage that, and finding that resource is difficult.
It really is, and like I say, and it's still very much taboo, you know, through the generations, and it has been, and that's why I think it was so powerful to talk about this. I know on that point around gender though, and again, this is a learning point for yourselves that we talked about, is getting that terminology right has been very, very difficult.
Yes, I think that's my reflective piece. When I was looking through the policy again before I spoke to you, every word, every mention will talk about a woman. And I know there is a lot of polarisation at the moment in terms of whether we do address the menopause policy for women, whether we address it, we talk about non-binary, for example. So I think for me, this does need a review. The language needs to be a little bit more inclusive. It wasn't set out to not be inclusive, but I think this is where it's a continual cycle. We're continually learning that everybody needs to be respected and everybody fits under this policy. It's applicable to everybody.
Brilliant. Well, let's get the open discussion. Yasmin, I'm delighted you kind of already jumped in today. Does anyone kind of have an opening question or anything they would like to come on, just share about why they joined today and I guess their reasons for coming on? Who would like to jump in first before I start picking on names? Because unfortunately, that's the way these things work. Anyone going to jump in? There we go, Marie. Fantastic. I'll pass on to you first.
Hello, Emma.
Hello,
lovely to see you after
how
all
you
these
doing?
years. So I was just going to say is that what I'm really encouraged by is that this is getting more airtime. Just today, there's a lady called Dr. Louise Newman, who's the UK leading specialist in menopause. She's also an author of a book, and I've wrote it down, preparing for the, how do you say that, perimenopause?
Yeah, perimenopause.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And it's just something that I'm of that certain age. So I need to educate myself a bit more about, really. So the fact that you're doing this today is really interesting. But my questions to Emma really is to, where did you go to find like the best practice approaches and things with your staff?
The resource. No, that's a really good point. The basis of the policy to begin with was the CIPD. So from that, my own professionalism, the CIPD is quite a wealth of resource on how to implement this. What's key for me is that you can always take an off-the-shelf policy. It's how you make it your own. So from BDHT point of view, I know that our policies, we try to deliver with empathy, compassion. So it's almost going, how would I want to be treated in this situation, which just so happens to be perfect as a 46-year-old woman. So there's an element of experience in it. But we also spoke to our female staff, and then we sent it out to all staff for consultation. I think, like you say, there is a huge amount of awareness at the moment. And what I feel a little bit like is a conduit. I want to take that information and pass it out as much as I can to people through the policy and constantly developing the policy. But the CIPD is a very good place to start in terms of their policies, because in terms of networking, there aren't many other housing associations at the moment that have got their own. So this isn't something that you can crib from somebody else, really. And you do need to make it your own. You need to know your own management population because of how it's going to be delivered and what resources you've got internally. So we've also got mental health first aiders. So again, it's about that if you couldn't go for your manager, you'd be able to go to your mental health first aider.
Yeah, brilliant. Sounds fantastic. Well done.
I guess for you, Emma, I guess through the process of putting this together, what was the steepest learning curve? What was the steepest kind of, was it like the initial implementation? Was it even just talking about introducing it? What was like the biggest challenge, I guess, that had to be overcome?
The biggest challenge I found personally was I was surprised. Not every woman wants to champion this, and that's and that comes down to personal preference, and you can't change that. But not everybody wanted this to be out there. Not everybody wanted sanitary products in the toilets made available because they found it was personal, and they don't feel that needed to be talked about in the work environment. And I personally struggled with that. I think I found it difficult, but you have to be respectful. And this was never about forcing, but why we couldn't champion each other at difficult times. But it is absolutely about respect. So I think that would have been my biggest learning curve, really.
And I know when we talked about it, you've had to be very, very clear to, like, as you mentioned just there, this isn't an enforced policy. It is a business policy.
No.
But there's nothing about it that is, you must do this. It's voluntary, but both for managers of any gender, however that may be. It's more about their training and their understanding and empowering people to talk about it if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also about the conversations that sometimes happen when it's linked to sickness absence, because that is when there needs to be a little bit more room, so to speak.
I was going to ask about that. What does that look like for you in BDHT? I mean, be as specific as you like, but in terms of, is there then, I mean, now that we're all working from home, I guess that's helped a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But how is that part of the policy kind of working for yourselves? Because, you know, if every month someone was taking days off, then it does have a knock-on effect, but then you want to be respectful. So how does that work for you? Because I know when I've managed a team before, which had female chief execs and female directors, actually it was just, well, you just send them to the doctor and tell them to get on with it.
Yeah.
And I could see there was more to it than that, but I didn't have any support.
I think, well, with any policy, it starts with listening. It starts with understanding what's happening first and foremost. Sickness absence can be difficult to manage. I understand that from an operational point of view, but if you can have the conversation where people are talking to you about menopausal symptoms or menstruation symptoms, you can actually be a lot more flexible than you realise in terms of what their productivity might look like if they are working from home. I think as well, one tool that I think is often overlooked and is seen as a little bit more sinister is the use of occupational health. Because some people might find that they don't know how to hold conversations with their GP, or we go to the GP, we believe everything that they say out of respect and we don't challenge. And I think a lot of the menopausal mood music at the minute is you can challenge your doctor if you don't feel listened to. But if you can use somebody like occupational health, which does come to a cost, it can be very supportive, because what you're getting is a third party, often medical professional, telling the individual and you, the employer, how you can manage those symptoms, what remedies might be in place, and also what more the workforce could do to help that situation. And I think the other thing that we do have, which is really good, so we have an employee assistance program that has also got a GP health line attached. So if you didn't want to go for your own GP, for example, if you didn't feel comfortable, if your regular GP is a man, for example, or occupational health wasn't needed at this point, but you just wanted some advice, there is a GP line that you can actually speak to. It's about a 10-minute wait, and you will get a general practitioner who can help and can actually prescribe via your GP if needs to. So I think, I know not everybody can offer that is, you know, a paid for benefit from, but I think it's very helpful to know that there are other avenues that you can seek support from.
Absolutely. And I think it's, like I said, this isn't just there's so many parts of the policy, and I think that's why I wanted to kind of bring this together today. Was it's not just oh, here's a bit of training, but there's so much to it that is so important. I've got a few people, so Shirley, Yasmin, Beverly, would anyone like to kind of jump in either with a question or thoughts on what we've discussed so far at all? Oh, Shirley's just leaving, so I'm guessing not Shirley, but Yasmin, over to you.
You know what? Something that's like kind of bugging me, like, you know, Emma, you just touched on occupational health. Like I'm 53 now, so I've had my kind of I don't know if it was my perimenopause or not, but I like kind of went through that phase where I had a lot of hot flushes and I hadn't slept very well at night time. It didn't mean that I was like totally lethargic and unable to cope with my working day, but my working day kind of would have helped me if it had started a little bit later. So I was just wondering that, you know, like I used to be a manager as well. So like as managers, like sometimes there's restrictions as to how much of a reasonable adjustment that we can make.
Yeah.
And that has happened to me as a manager. I used to manage in a contact center, and I remember a lady took a slightly longer lunch break. Luckily it was me, the one that confronted her. She was able to tell me that, you know, she'd had a little bit of she had really heavy flow, poor thing. Yeah. So it was really embarrassing for her. She popped into Primark, and obviously her 1 hour kind of exceeded. And, you know, luckily she was able to tell me that. And I did defend her, and my manager didn't like that. My manager said, well, she's going through what every other woman goes through, you know, kind of thing.
I think my thought on that is it comes down to the environment. And if you've got the right environment, those conversations would happen. I honestly believe at BDHT, situations like that wouldn't arise. There wouldn't be concern, because I'd like to believe that the individual would say to somebody, this has happened. It wouldn't be about making time up. because it's about the productivity overall. It's not about you rigidly work 37 hours. And that's a shift with agile working again as well, isn't it? That we're still learning how to look at productivity and not just presenteeism. But I'd like to believe that now, through the menopause policy, just through general conversations at BDHT, things like that just wouldn't come into fruition. Of course, there might be situations where people are having those, if they have to go out at lunchtime and it's longer, if they're not sharing that information, it does become more difficult, because we don't know what's happening, and it will look like somebody's not doing it. But I'd like to believe that our environment would mean that somebody could share that they were in a particularly difficult situation, and we would do all that we could to support.
But, like in particular, like with luckily, like Matt was saying, we don't have to go into an office now. So I was actually quite lucky. So I went through that phase and I was working from home. Like if I'd had to get up, I don't know, 6:30, 7 in the morning to get ready for my day, I don't think I would have been able to do it because of the night that I'd had. Like there were nights when I literally probably only slept 3-4 hours, if anything.
Yeah, and I think this is where the policy will come in. And at the moment, I would like to think that 12 months time, come back to me and I'd be going, yeah, we've got women that come in later. It's absolutely fine. People are coming in at 10 o'clock. It's of no consequence. They're either working through to 6 o'clock, or they're doing something different with their hours, or in fact everything's done and we don't need that time back. I think that is the flexibility that is going to come naturally, because the policy was one thing, embedding it is another, and keeping it alive is the challenge. Anybody could say we've got a policy. It's how you embed it, and it's how you continue to learn and make sure that you still have women who feel empowered, who feel that they are still providing a good service. And I think that's what you're going to get naturally. And we shouldn't be worrying about whether people need to come in later, for example, because it's about that they're going to feel engaged and they're going to give you productivity in everything you deliver, because they've got that environment to achieve. If you look at, I can only talk about myself at 46, my children are getting to that point where they don't need me as much. I'm ready to go for my career, and then my hormones go, no, you're not. And I think we've got to recognise we've got women, we've got people in our workforce who are at an age where they absolutely have got the skills we need. We don't want them to go out the workforce. They're engaged, they're motivated, and we've just got to help them. That's it. It's just as simple as listening, providing support and help where we can. And I'm just going to share this with you. I came into work this morning and my colleague had put 2 pumps of Estrogel on my desk because she knew I'd got a shortage supply. If that doesn't mean I haven't got the best teammate in the world, then I don't know what does.
But equally then, the fact that then that's so open, and the fact that you can do that, and that is a culture thing. And I think that's where, you speak across housing. There was a report that came out, it was only earlier in the year, that was saying that, still in boards in the UK, 56% are still white male. And when you're trying to talk, you look at chief execs and your senior leadership teams, your executive teams, there is still that big disparity between even just male and female, never mind all of the other diversity that we need across it. And so I do think it's really empowering that you're doing it, but also that, as you said, there isn't that you just put out a policy.
No.
It's a policy that needs to be actioned. We're going to bring April in, and then obviously we'll touch back on it. But April, thank you for joining us today. Please jump in.
Hiya. Sorry I don't have my camera on. Ironically, I'm feeling and looking terrible because it's that time of the month. So so I wanted to ask, because I work in the supported housing sector, and I don't know if this extends to any residents that you guys might have, but I wondered what your advice would be on sort of implementing a similar sort of, policy or environment for our residents, because, I work with vulnerable people, people who were previously homeless, at risk of homelessness, ex-offenders, a whole host of vulnerable people. And I guess I'm just wondering if you had any advice on how we could take this forward, not only in the workplace, but in terms of our residents as well.
That's a fantastic question. I guess my thoughts to start with, it comes down to that communication. Whether your communities want to pick that up as a policy separately, But I know at the moment there is so much work communities are doing with mental health within the community that I think menopause would slot really nicely into that. So whether you had it as its own policy or it sat within that mental health piece of work, I think it's there. I'd like to think that it would start with how your colleagues are talking about it as well. That if they're talking with their customers, that they happen to mention the policy that they've got, they happen to mention the learning. But for me, that sits within the mental health support that our communities and residents need at the minute, for sure.
April, is there something where you're noticing that actually there needs to be, or you feel like there needs to be a change there for some residents in particular at all?
Well, first of all, I'm not a service worker, just to make you aware, so I don't actually work on the ground too much. I do get to do some lovely accommodation visits, and because I work in research and development, so I do get to go out and speak to residents and engage how they feel. We do unintentionally, but we do have quite a lot of women that come to us who are like domestic violence victims or survivors, and I think when it comes to that group of vulnerable people in particular, maybe the conversations are even more difficult, because again, it is a really private thing and they can be a little shut off. So I think that it would vary between the group of vulnerable people that we're talking about, and I guess that's where I feel it gets a little bit trickier, because of course with things like mental health, and I think, by the way, that was a great idea to sort of get that encompassed within a mental health framework, because that's obviously something that we work really hard on. But yeah, I think that the main complexity in it for me, I feel, would be sort of tailoring it to the different types of vulnerable people that we work with. I hope I said that correctly. That was a bit waffly.
No, I do understand what you mean. And I don't, again, it's one of those one size won't fit all here, but maybe it is about putting the menopause on any forms, any standard items that you're having in those initial conversations, that, for example, it would feature under a medical condition, for example. I would start that conversation. I don't have any other answers, particularly right now, but for me, it's definitely under the umbrella of mental health, and those initial conversations are probably really quite key to setting the environment that somebody feels that they could share it, even perhaps if it's not on a form, for example. Sorry, the only other thing I was going to say, there's definitely a big piece of work around period poverty. I think that is just as key to the work that we're doing around menopause and menstruation, and that's very much in the community. So if, for example, you were to go into a scheme of BDHTs, should there be sanitary towels available and products to that you might think, why would they be there? But there could be a relative visiting, for example, who hasn't got access to that, or is genuinely thinking about what they're going to use because they've got to make dinner. So I think period poverty would also really fit into that as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And I like the fact that you've mentioned there, Emma, that actually tying it in with your mental health policy and looking at it under that umbrella, because I certainly think from like I say, this is from a male perspective of someone who's, I'm mid-30s, clinging onto that, clinging onto that. It's not something that I've ever talked about. It's not something, even when my own mum and stuff has gone through it, and and she's been through, she's 60 now. You kind of go in, it's just not something, like I knew what was going on, but it was never talked about. It's like, oh, she's just, it's fine. And so how on earth I'm ever, if I was managing a team, if I went back into an agency and I might be managing a team or consulting with a business and someone was going through, like I said, menstruation issues or having, going through the menopause, I'm completely unempowered because I have no real life experience. But more than that, I've got no one I've ever talked to about it. So I think it's really important that by bringing it under that mental health umbrella, it just empowers it more as actually, look, this isn't something anyone can control. This is something we have to support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can start those conversations. It's great to give a template, and we do want to develop staff's awareness, but I think it just comes down to an empathetic approach. If you're speaking to somebody and you ask them if they're okay and they say yes, and they're not, are you sure? is there anything you want to talk to me about? I'm willing to listen. Can I help? And sometimes you might just need to be persistent. And, and of course, like I say, we do need to give the guidance, and we need to know that we need people to know that these conversations might not be easy, but I think just actually being a little bit compassionate, and maybe it might take some people out of their comfort zone, but the key is to just recognise you're just trying to help somebody, just somebody that needs some help.
I'm going to bring Beverly in because you've been so patient, but I agree with you completely on everything you've said there. And it's just, and I think there's a touch point there in terms of that's why we need also people back in the office at times, because you can miss things if you always, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just going to turn my camera off and I'm good. You can tell when someone's in person that it's different. Beverly, thank you for being so patient. I'm bringing you in, and I know obviously you're at BDHT, I believe.
I am at BDHT, currently at home today though. I was just, first of all, just responding to April's question really about, what could you do to offer out to residents or customers or anybody, visitors even. And I was just thinking about, I think the way that I would think about it is, what actually is it we can offer? So are we offering some products or some support groups or a specialist, a tour to specifically men or to a mixed group or whatever? Because if you know what you can offer, then you can actually offer it out. When you say, you can talk to me about anything, obviously you can talk to me about anything, but it's almost like you're saying, and this would include, if you've got any questions on this, and you could have a list of like 100 things, couldn't you? That I'm just making sure I'm trying to include everything, so you can talk to me about anything and everything. And I was thinking that I joined today for a couple of reasons. I'm interested in the subject, but also I was really pleased to see that Emma was doing something outside of the business on this. And I was looking at how can we promote more. So I'm looking at what messages can we be giving on social media or direct to our customers in some way, or, on the TV in reception, that we could put this information out. So I wanted to just get a feel of this, how it was working outside of the organisation as well. So I've forgotten what I was saying, but basically about, when you know what you can offer, you can promote it. So I think, if you try and just look at one specific thing, like April, maybe it is just about putting a poster up somewhere in some schemes or something to start with, to say, if you want to talk about this subject, you can call us on this number, or we've got something on our website that you could look at, or something like that, or here's some useful links, because that might just be the start of it. Because when you've got a forum like this, which is a captive audience, and I'm sure it's been a bit of a struggle at times for Emma to go forward with this with everybody in the business. We've got a real mix of people, but I think the support from the leadership team probably has helped a little bit. We've got some, we've got female representation in our senior management, which I'm hoping that was a supportive thing for Emma. But it's like, well, okay, so we get this in the office, we're all lovely in the office and we're all going to be like, okay. But then a visitor comes in, you've got some stressed tenants, that are having a really difficult time. And there probably isn't always that opportunity to say, and could it be anything to do with this subject? Do you want to talk to me about this? So I think having that promotional stuff around, those visible things, give you a bit of a way in for customers, visitors, anybody to talk about it.
Yeah.
Really, really, really good point. And I think it also empowers those conversations very much that you say, when it becomes suddenly normal to talk about it, when it becomes normal day-to-day conversations talk about menopause and menstruation, then suddenly you can just go, oh, have you thought it might be that? Rather than being, oh, I don't want to mention that because that's the N word, and I just don't want to get involved in that, which is obviously the other side that happens. Beverly, thank you so much for sharing. I think I couldn't agree with you more. When I went down and sat down with them and talked about this and talked about it coming onto a roundtable, I know initially there was that like, yeah, okay, but actually the support from Emma throughout has been brilliant, and I feel like this is hopefully just the start of us getting more businesses talking about this and hopefully implementing a policy of their own. Shirley, great to have you with us. Please come in.
Oh, hi everyone. Nice to see you.
Hi.
And thank you for hosting. It's quite cutting edge, I think, actually. I just wanted to say a few things really. That so I did work in Wales for a while, so I'll send some contacts through. There's a lady that I know who does a menopause newsletter, which is
fantastic.
yeah, really good. I like it under a wellness banner. I don't consider myself to have a mental health problem. I'm going through the menopause at the end of the day, and you know, it's about my well-being. I've found through my own GP, who we're very lucky, our surgery has a specialist GP. So she's the go-to. So there's a website, rather than reading the whole book, called themenopausedoctor.co.uk, which the author does feature on. That was really helpful. And I'd got to a position, funny enough, I wasn't able to sleep properly, which affected me, because then I dreaded going to bed the following night. I feel I'm overly sharing, but to help you understand.
Not at all.
I like oversharers.
So dreading going to bed the following night, because am I going to sleep or not? Waking up literally drenched. And I mean, this is the only I thought the only side effect, but anyway. So I work for a corporate, I work for a property development company. So there are a lot of men around, and I think it's about giving people a language. I'm quite straightforward and confident. I'll just say, listen, this is the menopause. I can't sleep, so I've got to have some time out. Yeah. And it's almost like they don't know what to say, because actually I know exactly what's going on. But I think the language, and I think the awareness raising, and we've got some mental health first aiders, so we have embraced certain parts of wellness. Of course, one of the things I don't like doing is paying for prescriptions for HRT, because the amount of, and I will call them drugs because they are. So it was the chemist that said to me about having an annual certificate, which saves money. But equally, I also know through my own company's policy, which is only a really low level health policy, there is a up to £50 a year for prescriptions. So again, it's things like that, which certainly some of my colleagues sort of didn't realise, and you know, even down to dental care and eyewear. And the other thing that I've found, and again, took me a while to get there, was just this sense of anxiety that comes at times. I've worked in the sector forever in housing, and for me, it was just so alien to feel like that. It was just really weird. And fortunately, because we've got this specialist GP, I was able to. So actually, she's. I've had a complete wellness check. She's changed my medication a bit, and just having that time to share with somebody who you know understands. She's quite young, relatively speaking, but she understands. It just made me feel better. Full stop. So anyway,
I've worked in a number of senior management positions in housing, Shirley. Have you heard of anything like, obviously, the policy BDHT are putting in, or how did, I guess, any colleagues you knew previously who might be going through menopause, how was that dealt with? I say dealt with, that's a horrible term, but supported, but not supported in terms of housing?
No, lots of stereotypical stuff, you know, oh, she's on her monthlies, or, you know, whatever, which is why, you know, because I have worked in housing forever, I'm just completely supportive of all these sorts of you know, I sort of call them root level policies that as a sector, I think we embrace really well. But equally, you know, talk to my colleagues about it and don't, you know, and I may say to them, you know, you might be embarrassed if I talk about this, but I just need to tell you, and please don't be embarrassed, because I'm not embarrassed.
I think what's important as well is that our chief executive, Graham, he's 100% behind this policy. And I think sometimes also having a male in the organisation who is really comfortable to talk to, it's just another avenue, because there might be people out there who don't want to speak to their manager, don't want to speak to HR, but they just want a confidential chat with another male, for example. It just gives them confidence. It is about exploring every opportunity to chat and just ask a question.
It is, and I think, you know, I completely understood the point about the 2 estrogen pumps on your desk. Because again, you know, I was having, because of COVID, I was having to get a repeat prescription every month, and it was bonkers. And I said, and that I don't live near the doctors, it's a car journey, you know, and I just said to the doctor, you know, this is stressing me, because if I don't put the repeat request in time, I can run out. There are shortages, I know that, because sometimes I've only been given like 1 strip of tablets, just like literally 5 tablets, and I'm like, oh. And straight away she just went, oh no, she said, I can do that for every 3 months. So I think, you know, for people that, if you are having treatment, it's important that you encourage people to have it reviewed. And it's very easily adjustable, because I found my sleeping was affected again, and she just went, oh, just have an extra pump every night, just, you know, fine. This is a gel, by the way, for those of you that don't know. And there's all sorts of things available. And sorry, I will finish in a minute, so, because don't be put off by people saying, oh, well, it's linked to breast cancer, it's linked to this, it's linked to that. You need to go on your own journey. And that's what I always, you know, say to my friends. You know, they say, well, I don't need it. Well, maybe just explore and just have a think about it. Because I've got friends who are equally, you know, anxious at times. So, yeah, you have to make your own decision rather than somebody telling you.
And I think as well that's, you know, in terms of the policy development and how it goes further at BDHT, there will be women within the organisation, people in the organisation who HRT is not going to work for. So these symptoms are not going to go away, and we have to find ways to support that through no fault of their own. They are with debilitating conditions and still want to work, quite rightly so. And it's again, signposting GPs, but also recognising there may be more we have to do in that particular circumstance as well.
I think it's also really important there from a learning perspective, from an education side, because evidently yourselves will have to research yourselves, go to, I don't know, mums, go to, you know, colleagues who've been through it and that kind of stuff. I never will. Yeah, I never will go to things similar. And, you know, I'm learning, you know, the first time I've heard about this pump is today. First time I've heard about this detail is today. And like I say, I'm mid-30s, and I probably won't hear about it unless I end up getting education. Yeah, I could easily, as I say, be in a business where I could be managing staff who could be, or leading teams that could be. And I agree with you also about your point about having a strong male ally in the business. And obviously I've worked with Graham before, and he's a huge kind of advocate for this kind of stuff, and for a huge range of things. But as a guy, I probably would feel more, it sounds stupid, I feel less stupid going to someone like Graham and being like, look, I know you know a bit about this, what do you know? Then I would going to a female colleague who's kind of like, God, another guy who knows nothing about it. And again, I know that's where the policy is trying to kind of embrace that education piece.
And I think as well, you can look within your own personal networks. There will be people within your friendship group that you know will be happy to speak about something. So now, if nothing else, you might leave thinking, I've got that friend, I know she'll talk to me. So it's as much about asking the right questions and then working out who you can ask, really.
And everything, like I say, that management training piece, I'd love to see more of it, because you're never going to learn about it in school. This is an education piece you're never going to learn about through school or university or anything like that unless you specialise in it. So at some point there needs to be an education, and if we're going to educate managers about it, then that's the time to do it. Beverly, thank you. I'll bring you back in.
Hi. Yeah, I was just thinking about, like, you've come to this today because, you know, there's different connections and you're putting something on and everything, but like, how would you get more men involved in things? I think perhaps all men group discussions might be a bit easier than a mixed group, where, you know, people might feel, like you say, a bit stupid saying, I don't know much about this, but, you know, we have got a lot of men in the organisation, and we've got teams that are lots of men in teams. And
I really hoped, I mean, I invited an awful lot of men to this in the hope for exactly that reason. But then it was when I ran one on, it's a shame Yasmin isn't still with us, because she was on that call with me, but I ran a diversity, it was about how do we improve kind of diversity in the social housing sector? How do we get a better, and it was on the time on better race diversity in senior management roles and executive roles in housing. And the only other white person on a call of 20 people that day was Graham from BDHT. And he has been such an ally in terms of me raising conversations such as this. And I know when Emma put this on LinkedIn about the menopause policy, and I said, I'd love to talk to you about a roundtable about it. I know she went and spoke to Graham, well, what's Matt like? Yeah, because this is important. I feel really frustrated, actually, that there aren't more people who want to come on and learn. Because yes, when I first started doing these, I mean, I started doing these in the middle of lockdown, so beginning of lockdown, it was a networking opportunity. I could keep in touch with some clients, and I could kind of go, yeah, as and when things change, if you need to recruit, I'm here. And now, apart from the tiny bit I do at the beginning, I never talk about recruitment on these, because the idea behind them and the way it's evolved was to try and make change on a huge array of topics. And it's constantly trying to drive change and drive. And I know Marie's been on an awful lot of these with me and will vouch for me with those, which is brilliant. But I do find it frustrating that there's suddenly a chance here to come on and learn. And maybe it would be changing the topic title. Maybe it's less about introducing a policy, maybe it's going to talk about the menopause, and just see whether or not more people, or talk about menopause for men, or whatever I say for men, but then gender, all the rest of it. So I don't know is the answer. I will continually keep trying. I'd love for something like this to come on a Housing 20, I know we're not going to get in this year, but Housing 2023, and kind of speak to the guys at Ocean Media and say, look, if you're looking for guest speakers next year, BDHT have now been doing this, by then it will be for 3 years. This is the success, and maybe that's how we do it. And I'll help champion that all the way. But it's great to have male allies, but it's unfortunate when not enough, and there's so many men who come on these roundtables and yet they've not joined today. And it's an interesting one. And I don't yet have an answer, but if anybody does have one and is watching the recording of this, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I know, Emma, you'd love to get more male allies involved in this too.
Oh, absolutely. And I would hope there will be more people watching this, recording it, because we've got to accept it's still emerging. For some of us here now, it's been on our radar for a while, but for some people, they're not watching the news, they're not watching Davina McCall, they might not have a direct experience at home. So people are just putting their toes in the water. So maybe today's conversation, if there's one other person that suddenly thinks, next time if there's a conversation, I am going to join in because I want to learn, then that's a great achievement. It's going to be a slow change, but slow changes usually last longer. They'll embed longer and have a greater impact.
Has there been anything that's changed with the policy since you introduced it? Anything that's kind of adapted or edited, and kind of as you've gone along, go, actually that part we need to, or I know you've already mentioned that some parts are going to update based on the gender language?
Not as such, but it's due for a review this year. So, I mean, again, once we've done that, I'd be happy to share the learning from what we've got as a standard policy, and then after the 12-month review, how we've further adapted it or embedded it to be more suitable for BDHT.
I just think it's amazing that you've introduced it in the first place. And I think it's brilliant that the business has turned around and gone, we have to talk about this. And I think that's the key thing, just someone talking about it.
I think the one area that's really important is the premenstrual I can't always say premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a really serious condition that's linked to menstruation. And even I wasn't aware of it till about 12 to 18 months ago. And it's so distorting and debilitating for people who are suffering that we wanted to put it into this policy to recognise just how debilitating it is. And that person wholeheartedly now talks about it, is not ashamed to talk about it, knows that they've got support in their workplace. And again, of course, it's great that one person benefits from that, and we want that, but the more people that come forward and even recognise the signs, because again, we're all told that cramps and heavy bleeding is all to be expected, but actually what's right? At what point does it become a condition that we shouldn't have to manage on our own? And I think we've become so accustomed to just dealing with it, not letting anybody know, not coming for support, but actually you could be dealing with a really serious condition, and a couple of paracetamol and a hot water bottle is not going to fix it.
What is it?
It's a real imbalance of hormones. It's obviously when your cycle every 21 to 28 days, there's a normal change and influx of hormones, but I will read what it says in the policy, but it causes a severe range of emotional and physical symptoms every month during the week or two before the menstrual cycle. It's sometimes referred to as severe PMS, premenstrual syndrome. Experiencing PMDD can make it difficult to work, socialise and have healthy relationships. I mean, that's the key to your well-being right there. And if you're faced with that every 3 to 4 weeks, that's a big ask to go through unsupported and unaided.
And again, it's something that needs to be talked about. It's something that, as you say, I mean, I'm like I said, whatever age now, and I've never heard of it, and yet have dated a lot, and obviously I've got lots of female friends, and so it's mad that things like this aren't made more obvious and more clear to. Again, it's that training. At what point do we educate? And I think there needs to be that education. It's also for, when we talked earlier on about language, and I know Shirley brought it up around kind of the language in housing associations, and I mean that's public sector, never mind private, but that language piece, if there is training on it when someone joins an organisation, if it's part of the, by the way, you're now day 3 of my induction week today is our wellness training, and for 2 hours we're going to go through it, and that is included. That makes a huge difference because you'll recognise it in colleagues. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the thing that we do very well in our induction is let people know the suite of support. When they come to talk to me, I'm not there just going through the payroll and the standard administration. It's absolutely about the policies and what sets us apart. And it's these policies really, and why we choose to do them.
I know Marie just had to jump, and know other people will have 12 o'clock meetings. Is anybody, I mean, obviously Shirley, April, I know, and obviously Beverly, I know you're with BDHT. Is there anyone who's kind of got any last minute questions on the policy, or what they'd like to see, not just from that policy, but from the sector as a whole, in terms of moving forward now? Or if anyone's got any ideas on that question Beverly asked me, which is how do we champion this to that next stage? If anyone's got any ideas, then brilliant. I obviously don't want to run over 12, but if anyone's got anything, please share. Not yet.
Not yet.
Absolutely fine.
Small steps.
Yeah. But like you say, but it's steps forward. And I think this is the thing. And the more we can do to champion this. As I say, I'll make this recording available. I'll put something on LinkedIn. Emma, thank you for today. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you to everybody joining.
But thank you for sharing about the need to introduce it and actually the positive impact it's happening. Because I think it's very easy to go, this is the policy and this is what needs to change, but it's having a positive impact. Yeah. And it's the change we need to see. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
And looking forward to seeing if anyone wants to come on to the next one. Like I say, they're normally every Tuesday, but when we got talking about this one, we knew we need to get it in sooner rather than later. So we're doing one next. We're back to Tuesdays on supported exempt accommodation, but I'll ping an email around that. But thank you, everybody. And thanks,
Matt. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.